Well, good afternoon. This one is probably the most energetic panel discussion because we are discussing about energy, but energy in transition, where the decarbonization is a prime concern of our time in the 21st century. And therefore here, in the next 55 minutes, we are discussing about what are key challenges, what should be the government policy, as well as the set of regulations that could incentivize the further investment for the decarbonization. But first, can I ask Mr. Smith first, can you share with us what have Exxon Mobil here in Asia have been doing in order to ensure that we move into a decarbonized society and achieve net zero? And what are the key challenges in that procedure?
Thank you very much. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here with all of you. At Exxon Mobil, I think there is a strong commitment towards our own footprint decarbonization by 2050, which essentially meets all of the Paris Agreement requirements. But in addition to that, there is a very significant focus on providing similar solutions to the rest of the world. At Exxon Mobil, we have already a pathway. I mean, nearly 95+% of our operated assets, we already know exactly what it takes to decarbonize those, both technically and what the cost of that is. The next step for us is really implementing and going down the path, making those technical investments to do that. But that same technology that we're applying to our own efforts to decarbonize is the technology we want to make available to governments as well as our partners to be able to do that. And the area for focus for us is 4 key areas. One is carbon capture and sequestration. Second is hydrogen. Third is ammonia. And fourth is biofuels. And the reason why we're focused on these 4 key technologies is that they look to address nearly 70% of the world's emissions which take place in hard to decarbonize sectors. These are sectors like steel mills, cement factories, heavy industry emissions, emissions that are difficult to replace, and the only way to do that is by using something like a carbon capture sequestration technology, as you cannot power up these heavy industrial sector through other forms of energy, like renewables. It is more difficult to do so. You cannot get the furnace temperature high enough. And the couple of industries that I highlighted were sort of steel mills, cement factories, heavy industry. If we think about Asia Pacific very specifically, this is where all of the global growth, the GDP growth is taking place. And economies like Thailand or the regional economies desperately need access to those type of goods to be able to continue to grow the economy. You want to be able to build buildings. You want to be able to use the steel for construction or lay down new roads to increase commerce. And so if the energy that takes to produce that can be done in a lower carbon footprint, I think that's the way to go. So carbon capture and sequestration, very simply, post-combustion carbon can be captured out of the flute gas. So essentially at a steel mill, you can capture the carbon using amine technology. Then you have to transport it. And then you sequester it deep under the earth, under the surface. So for example, today, oil and gas that the energy sector produces has been in place for millions of years. 4, 5, 6, 7 million years. It's been there. It doesn't leak because we have essentially what's called caps and reservoir traps. And so for carbon sequestration, it is utilizing that same knowledge that the industry has had for decades, to be able to figure out where are the locations where you can actually store the CO2 safely and permanently. So that's a solution. And in Asia Pacific, what are we doing to enable it? Just last weekend, I was at the G20 summit, and ExxonMobil and Pertamina signed an agreement specifically to be able to pursue this particular effort in Indonesia, where we have identified a specific location, which we think is rather prolific, where we believe that we can actually permanently store CO2 from emissions that take place both domestically and across from the region. So enabling policies are required. You asked, like, what is ultimately required? And we can address that maybe a little bit later, but enabling policies would make these value chains sort of work.
Wonderful. It seems that you have identified very clearly about the directional what to go and where to achieve and what kind of technology and innovation. But next question in the next round, I will ask you about challenges and how to address that, and especially support from government sector and other stakeholders. And can I ask PTTEP, Kun Nirandorn, about this? What have PTTEP has been doing for the decarbonization, and what are the key advantages that you have, and what kind of challenges, technical challenges, regulatory challenges that you have been experiencing? Kun Nirandorn.
Okay, thank you for the question, and good to see all the audience here. I'm coming from the upstream business, and as an upstream business, E&P, we have been viewing ourselves as the very initial source that release CO2 in the atmosphere, right? The thing is, the company is now trying to capture those CO2 that has been released into the atmosphere and injected into the depleted reservoir, because we live in the same world and we want to have a greener environment. Well, actually, it's not only E&P business that generate the greenhouse gas. The other business as well. But we, as the very beginning of the supply chain of the energy, we have to be very cautious and bear in mind all the time. Company has the inspiration to be the first mover in injecting the CO2 into the depleted reservoir. We have been studying this kind of technique since last year, and by the end of this year or early next year, we're gonna do the engineering study into the feed study, and hopefully we will be able to do the first injection in 2026. I try to make it 2025. The area that we going to inject is the offshore of Thailand, okay, the so-called Arctic field. Even though the rate of injection is very low compared to the CO2 that has been released, but we need to be the first mover who do it. In term, when it's come to your question about how the government can help, we would also engage with the Ministry of Energy and Ministry of the Environment, and they are very active and supporting us and our partner as well. I think it's a kind of interesting technology that PTT want to be the first who do this kind of thing. Do we need the support from the government? Yes, but at the bigger scale. And I believe it's from the regulator point of view, they have to answer to the public that why they have to support the E&P business, not any other business. I think on government sector, they are weighing between supporting only oil and gas business or the other business as well, okay? But we, as a first mover, we cannot wait for that. And I think the company has the direction that we have to move forward and do it without waiting for the incentive just yet. And hopefully in long run, when the government see the benefit of doing so, we will be able to do it in a bigger scale and collaborate more with the other parties. That's my comment.
Wonderful. So in the next 3 to 4 years, we might be able to see your achievement. Wonderful. From executive from oil and gas company, let's come to another sort of power, electricity. May I ask Mr. Link about the decarbonization? What have you been doing? I know that, Grimm Power has done a great deal. Can you elaborate to us what kind of decarbonization that have you been contributing?
Okay, thank you. So let me start maybe in a different way. The Thai language is a language which uses the word hard very importantly. So most of the important words are a combination of something else with hard. So for instance, to understand means to enter some And I think we are too much brain-oriented. But as a businessman, you also know that you have to engage your guts. So you have to have the mind, the heart, and the gut. And today we all listen to Macron, and he talked a lot about cooperation, but he also talked about fight. And I think whatever we do, let's talk about cooperation, let's talk about the heart, how we can engage with each other in a positive way so that we create benefit for society, and talk about cooperation more than we talk about competition. So, same when we talk about decarbonization. I don't think anybody wants to decarbonize anything because we need carbon. Carbon is a really important part of industry and society. But what we want to do is we want to reduce excessive greenhouse gases. But we need carbon dioxide in nature, because otherwise how can plants grow? So let's say, how can we contribute to reduce intensive greenhouse gases? Well, first of all, Grimm started as following the government policies to attract industries from other countries to invest in Thailand. How? By providing constant high stability, stable voltage electricity to those industries that need it. And so, fortunately, when you buy electricity from us, you already reduce your carbon footprint by 30% by buying from us. And what we add is some things in that direction. What we just hear from Exxon, that we are already hydrogen ready. We can use 50% hydrogen. We do a lot of solar rooftops, and what we do worldwide now, we are engaged in renewable energy. So I have thousands of megawatt under development in renewable energy. And when I talk about cooperation, and one of our values is pioneering spirit, we go into many countries and we find out actually that the Thai attitude of using the heart and using cooperation is very helpful in bringing three countries together to create renewable energy projects that are benefit to their economy. So somehow the Thai way is helpful in reducing tensions and getting things done. So we managed to get a number of nations who otherwise wouldn't talk with each other to cooperate and introduce very important solar and wind projects, which we're now trying to do worldwide. The other thing we do is we work on biofuels. So we managed to find a company that can create sustainable oil out of algae, which many companies have tried to do and couldn't do yet. But this fuel company is in Malaysia, and Petronas is going to invest in it. So I think there are many ways of doing it. We follow some of these that Exxon is doing, and we massively invest in renewable energy, very helpful to our industrial customers, and so they can offset some of it. Another part is we're going to invest heavily in forestation. So that's another way of sequestration. So instead we won't be putting it in the ground, we're going to take it from the air. And that is something that has been close to our family's heart for a long time, so now we can start doing it as a business. So I think we have to always look at the world in a systematic way, and so we try to attach at many points where we see opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your heartful answer, and very informative and very enriching. Forestation, that's very important. And now let's come back to Mr. Zayed upon this. Nothing is free from obstacles. Of course, even though you have clear vision, you have the technical availability, you have innovations and solutions and directions, but somehow everything might be surrounded by different kind of challenges. What kind of challenges that you think they are ahead of us in our attempt in order to reduce the excessive greenhouse gas effect instead of decarbonization?
We see Asia Pacific as a unique location for the challenges on greenhouse gas emissions reduction. And parallel, it's a phenomenal opportunity as well. And what I mean by that is, if you were to draw a line from Pakistan, where I was born, that's where I'm originally from, and go eastwards, more than 50% of the world's population lives in that region. And if we think about any projection, either industry or research institute, GDP growth in this region is expected to be the highest relative to any other region around the world. Basics, very, very basics. Population growth means more energy consumption. Simple, very, very simple. So we know the world, and this part of the world specifically, needs more energy. At the same time, we have an existential threat with climate change that needs to be addressed and needs to be addressed head on. So how do governments strike that balance in ensuring that the economies continue to grow, people have reliable sources of energy, and we can move down this reduction of greenhouse gas emissions curve, that we go do that all in parallel. So that's a dual challenge. Meet the growing demand, which is going to happen, but have a lower carbon footprint. How do we do that, right? And earlier today, a lot more eloquent speakers than myself, states like Macron, they talked about collaboration across governments, collaboration policies which enable this type of effort, which is critical. And in Asia Pacific particularly, we are of course, we all know we live in this region, we're very diverse from a population perspective, but we're also geographically very, very diverse. And I come back to a solution that we think really works here, which is carbon capture and sequestration. Now, locations which do highest emissions of CO2 versus where you can store the CO2. So the Japanese or the Koreans are not endowed with storage capacity. They don't have history of oil and gas working areas. So their emissions essentially have to be captured if they want to move down the carbon curve, have to capture and then be transported to a location where the world has capacity to store. And that exists in locations like Malaysia, Indonesia, Australia, and some in Thailand, and a bit in Brunei. But those are the locations which can sequester the region's CO2. So if you just think about the names of the countries, well, these require bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements. These require the industry to play a role. And because this value chain is so new sets of agreements are required. Innovation is required. And in our holding room, I was making an analogy that the closest analogy that comes to mind that the industry has done in this way is the LNG business in the 60s and 70s, where at that point in time, methane was just emitted into the air. And then the industry realized, we can actually use this to run CCGT. CCGT is more new, but we can run power plants off of methane. And new agreements were struck. Governments got on board. They provided the appropriate guarantees, invested in innovation, and that took a molecule that just went into the air that we just emitted to turning it into as a source of energy. And today, LNG plays a very significant part in meeting energy needs. For carbon capture and sequestration, similar concepts, similar agreements, similar alliances are required. Governments to work together, working in collaboration with the industry, investing in the right areas, the right value chains, as well as having enabling policies that allow for this to take place. On the policy side, when it comes to CO2, of course, carbon tax or a cost to decarbonize is the way to go, because it provides a predictable mechanism to ultimately know how you finance the value chain. But the reality is in emerging markets, you cannot put a carbon tax because that comes at a cost of your economic growth. So how do we overcome that? That's where emitting economies to sequestration economies require what I would call enabling policies not necessarily ones that require full carbon tax, because in places like the United States, Europe, or developed economies, you can have a carbon tax and it makes sense. But in places like Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia, carbon tax comes at a cost to your base economic development. So you need almost like bilateral agreements that allow for this to work. So that's just one example of how in Asia Pacific, the connectivity across the geography and the governments can work. Similarly, we think hydrogen is a fuel of the future, but it also requires, again, similar level of collaboration. Hydrogen production is something that the industry has been doing for decades. Hydrogen consumption is also something that the industry has been doing for decades. But how do we get hydrogen from a production site to a consumption location, right? And you want to do this in a manner where you have a net zero emissions value chain. Ammonia, similarly, we talked about coal-fired power generation. We believe that ammonia can actually go into coal-fired power plants today, like where it can go into direct fire. And so for us, in our view, carbon capture and sequestration, the technology exists today to put it into place as soon as we have the right policies, enabling policies, which the governments can put in place, and that can take place today. Ammonia can be produced and brought into countries to replace coal-fired power generation, and it can be done with zero emissions. You can produce ammonia, blue ammonia, green ammonia with zero emissions. And then hydrogen is a technology which needs to be invested in, particularly cross-border hydrogen movement. Shipping solution for hydrogen today doesn't exist. We don't have technology in the world. To cool hydrogen down in a cryogenic state, it needs to be minus 400 degree plus or negative 400 degrees in a cryogenic state. Today, we don't have steel technology to move hydrogen in that state. So investments can be made in that particular area by the governments to promote innovation and technological development that can really, really help. But hydrogen is the fuel for the future and will start becoming a much larger part of the overall energy consumption in economies.
Thank you very much. I mean, in the next round, I might ask you about, it seems that everyone shares the same vision. We want to have energy security on the one hand, we want to have a better and cleaner world on the other, but finally, it doesn't seem that everyone will be on the same boat. Common understandings from various types of stakeholders is important. We address that into the next round. Shall I ask Mr. Links upon this? Everyone, I mean, not only here in Thailand, but in the entire planet share the same vision. We want to have energy security. We want to have a world a better place. But finally, it seems that sometimes the progress of this implementation, reforestation, clean energy seems to be pretty slow. What are the key obstacles and challenges that you, I mean, as executive in this area for a very long time, has been facing and experiencing?
So actually, the challenges are maybe similar all over the world, but the different countries are different. So one very simple way to have a let's say a greener electricity consumption in Thailand is by opening the grids, and you can have endless solar power plants in Thailand, which is different to the Philippines. The Philippines is very difficult to get the land approval to be used, or in Taiwan to get the land approval to use. Thailand is very simple. So you open the grid and put in solar power plants all over the place, and if you want to import green power into your industrial park, it's very easy. Regulatory positions in every country is different, so you have to address the regulatory parts in every country differently. So the more open they are, the easier it is. What we find in Japan is quite interesting is that the very large companies, they are not so agile to get to put up small solar plants somewhere or wind plants somewhere. But they're ready to buy the electricity and sell it to the industrial customers so that they can decarbonize that way. And so their smaller agile companies are fine. So there, maybe the system of the companies doesn't allow it so much. In the world now, you've seen the wars that have created a big havoc. So if you see that in Europe and Germany, people were very dependent on the cheap gas from Russia, and not so the French because they have nuclear power. So sometimes, and they were so much concentrated on renewable energy and the gas, so that they neglect how to transport actually the renewable energy from the north to the south where you need it. So I think every country has different regulatory issues or different systematic issues, and you have to always look at the total system in every country. And this is, I think, this is missing, because now every year we have a new abbreviation we have to deal with, whether it was a CSR or ESG or BCG or SDG or so. But that's why we like to look at doing business with compassion, which actually based on 2,500-year-old religion or all the other religions is something, how can you do something good for mankind? And try not to fight too much, but see how can we get something done. So if we now want to reduce the excess greenhouse gases, then let's cooperate how we get that. And some parts are very small regulations, like in Thailand, how do you open the grid? It's very simple. You open the grid. And then, or bigger issues like we talk about the war. But when we talk about now opening the grid in Thailand, you have to have sympathy or compassion for the companies who set up the grids. So the Metropolitan Electricity Authority, the Provincial Electricity Authority, now whenever you put a solar roof on your roof, then they don't have the income, but they don't get any compensation for the grid for providing you at night. So now what actually happens is the poor subsidize the rich. How? The rich can put a solar roof on their roof, the poor can't. So finally the grid has to be financed, so finally the prices have to be set. So you have to kind of make sure that you compensate everybody appropriately. And so you have to look at it as its own system, and that is actually, from my point of view, the biggest issue, that we don't look at the world holistically. And we now say that now the banks don't want to finance gas-fired power plants anymore. So in the moment, the whole world is fueled by renewable power, maybe 5% of all the megawatt hours. So 95% is still from nuclear, from fossil, but you don't give them financing anymore. Now the oil companies, they don't want to dig oil or gas anymore. They give the money back to the shareholders because they said, nobody wants us anymore. But actually, we still need you. So how can we come to a comprehensive view of everything, and we all work together to have a less greenhouse gas emission? And last point, I want to talk about forestation. So I've been very active in trying to promote forestation in Thailand according to the strategy of the country to have 50,000 more square kilometers of forest. What do you need to forestate? You need seeds. So let's say if we need 4 billion trees in Thailand, then you need maybe 5 billion seeds, because some maybe don't grow as a tree. But you have maybe per year only 5 million. So we have to go, as I said, systematically, you have to go to the button, and then the government has to make sure, how do we get all these seeds? Finally you find out that you not allowed to go into the national forest to get the seeds out. So somebody must be there to solve that issue. But it cannot be the private sector, but the private sector can get the seeds and grow them, make saplings, and then grow the trees. So that's why I think everything has to become comprehensively looked at, and we need a good cooperation between government and private sector to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think key point is collaboration. If you like his comment, you can give him a big round of applause. Everyone stay silent for a long time.
And with passion.
We need to,
With passion.
we need to energize each other. We're energy panel. Well, in the next round, I might ask Mr. Link about the heartful collaboration, how to enrich that, from your point of view. But next, I would proceed further to Kun Nirandorn, since you mentioned that you try very hard, PTTEP is a very determining company. We try to achieve the target within the year 2025 or 26 at the latest. But finally, public might have a questions. Well, the budget can be allocated for something for a better deed. So, I mean, what kind of measures that you would recommend everyone in order to ensure that the Thai people, we will share the same vision and we will share the same common understanding about the urgency that we need to reduce the excessive effect of the greenhouse effect?
Okay, thank you for the question. Within PTTEP itself, we are the company who has to secure the energy for the country. And then later on, we also looking at ourselves as the company that not only secure the energy for the country, but also we have to look at the sustainability, and the energy that we secure has to be affordable as well. You know, so it's like a triangular shape, and we are trying very, very hard to balance between those three pillars. When you talk about how do we let the stakeholder and the public aware of the need to reduce the GHG, or to make sure that we have to move toward the green energy. Well, if you ask me, I personally believe that fossil fuel, natural gas, is still with us, will be with us for another 20 years or so.
Decades, to say.
Because it's the most reliable energy source. The renewable energy will be used on the top of it, right, as a supplementary. But sooner or later, the fossil fuel will die out when you have a more reliable and sustainable renewable energy. And in order to do that, we have to wait for the new technology. For example, today, solar panel, it's seasonal based. It depends on the sunlight. And you need a very reliable battery to store it. Right? Without battery, you cannot use it during the nighttime. I have a chance to visit EGAT. They convert the dam, the power generation. They put the floating solar on the surface of the water. During the daytime, they generate the power using the water, hydropower. And during the nighttime, during the other way around. During the daytime, they use the solar power, right, to energize the pump to suck the water back to the upstream. And during the nighttime, they use the hydropower plant to produce the electricity. It's a kind of very interesting. But I just hope that those kind of technology will sustain for a long period of time. For PTTEP itself, we have a new division in the company which we call CNB, the new business. We look into the possibility to step into the hydrogen power, and we also look into the technology that we can convert CO2 into some other final product that will be more useful. We call it, we have been doing that in the research center in Rayong, and we succeed in doing that to convert the CO2 into the carbon nanotube, which is the very fundamental substance that you can use it in the petrochemical or produce something else. Well, at least I heard from Dr. Link that he still counts on the upstream E&P business. So that means I still have a job to do myself. Thank you for that. As an upstream producer, what PTTEP is trying to do is we try to minimize the CO2 release into the atmosphere. All the technology that we employ now today is a kind of state of the art, and we try to capture and protect or prevent any leak from the system. You know, now today we even have the how to call it, the ultrasonic gas detector that you can hear the gas leak from the pipeline from the distance away. I think our Exxon, you probably familiar with that. Because greenhouse gas is not only CO2, it's also including methane, CH4, right? And CH4, when it's released into the air, it causes more damage than CO2 itself in terms of the concentration. So we try to protect all the equipment that we have on hand, not to release to the atmosphere, not to release greenhouse gas into the atmosphere. Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for your input.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Said, one part of your statement interests me. When you say that if we, especially in the country like Asia Pacific, we implement carbon taxation, it is a financial burden for some part of the people, but the policy without a public consensus behind would go nowhere. So how do you think about the way in which we build, for example, common understanding about how urgency it is for everyone to be engaged in the process, and how to ensure that the public is together, we are on the same boat? What would be your recommendation?
Yeah, I think the the challenge in Asia Pacific, as I was highlighting earlier, is the diversity of the economic throughput or the GDP per capita across the region. It varies very, very dramatically relative to other sort of major sort of regions, if you were to compare, where there's maybe a bit more homogeneity across sort of different economies. If you were in Europe or you were in Americas, you get that a little bit more. I think in Asia Pacific, it's vastly different. So for example, like the Japanese economy GDP per capita or the Singaporean economy of GDP per capita is significantly different than Thailand or Malaysia or Indonesia. So one size fits all definitely is not a solution for Asia Pacific. And so what is it that could work, right? To your question, and then I'll come back to the second point around the public education and how do we address some of these concerns with the population. One of the ways to really think about this, particularly in the early days, and early days probably over the next coming a couple of decades, is to have more bilateral agreements where you have policies that enable the value chain, because there's probably no dispute that climate change is an issue, climate change has to be addressed, and greenhouse gas emissions have to be reduced. I think that debate is long gone, and so where the focus now is, well, how do we address this? And so in Asia Pacific, I think having policies that enable, one is understanding what will it actually take to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. So I highlighted a few technologies like CCS, hydrogen, ammonia, biofuels, and there are others, of course, implementation of solar and wind, which can address only part of the challenge, but not all of the challenge. So enabling policies, and what do I mean by that? Enabling policies are ones where economies which have high emissions of CO2 or concentrated emissions and have the ability to pay. Economies with high GDP have to work together with countries which have storage capacity, permanently store CO2, who then understand that you have to connect the trade routes where CO2 emitted in country A can then be sequestered in country B. That's how you physically connect, and you ultimately achieve the objective of the reduction of CO2 emissions. So that's kind of your physical connection and step number one. I think the second element about how do you educate the population around the importance of CO2 sequestration is an effort that is jointly between the industry and the governments in terms of really educating the population around why this is necessity. Hopefully that's an easier task, because I think the population generally has an understanding that climate change is upon us and we need to do something about it. I think that component is what do I get out of it? Like, why should I, and in very simple terminology, why should I, as a recipient of CO2 from another country, why should I take somebody else's trash? What's the reason, right? And there you have to have really a vision or a view that is a bit more regional or global, to say that, you know, we're contributing towards the global reduction of CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. And that investing in this particular value chain will create jobs in economies or countries where you would be storing CO2, new technology is brought in, and that once that value chain is set up, meaning there's a mechanism to store the CO2 in country B, when the country B's economy is ready to store their own CO2 and their own CO2 emissions, it then can be done because you can leverage that existing value chain. And so for the populations, it's an element of education, one, that it can be done safely, because the oil and gas sector today, what we deal with is hydrocarbons, which actually are combustible. Very dangerous value chain, and we've been managing this safely for decades of experience in doing that. We believe that we can actually do the same for CO2, which, very honestly speaking, is far less combustible. Actually, it's not combustible. You never want it to escape into the atmosphere when it's captured, but, you know, par for par, it is less risky than, let's say, a vessel carrying crude oil or a vessel carrying LNG. And that type of education is something that we need to do for the general population, for our government officials, policymakers, so they understand that, and hopefully that allows for all of us to come together and ultimately address climate change and, you know, the existential threat that we actually have with it.
Well, thank you very much. If you like his comment, give him a big round of applause. I'm sure that the entire hall learned really a lot today from the three gentlemen. By the way, I really like this. The policy that enrich value chains, the enabling policy. We need to think about all the stakeholders. Yeah? We have the final 9.5 minutes here, and I wish to ask the three of the gentlemen. One of the points in which we can't miss collaboration. We hear this word 10,000 times already, but we need to repeat it again because it is not an option. It is compulsory that we need to stand together. In terms of collaboration in this particular regard, what kind of collaboration would you think we need in order to establish the world a better place as far as decarbonization is concerned? Shall I start with Mr. Link here?
Thank you. So one of our most important values is partnership. And so that's why also compassion and heart and understanding is so important. Because when we partner, we would like to, first of all, understand our partner. And secondly, we would like to be of benefit to our partners. And so then we start trusting each other. And when we trust each other, then we can work together for many decades going forward. So as Grimm, we have some partnerships go back for over 120 years and still going strong. And we created many new partnerships. We are now investing very strongly in renewable energies, which in this region, some countries, they are not so expensive to invest, but in some they are very expensive. So now we're investing about $10 billion into new projects of many thousands of megawatt of renewable energy. So to do that, we need a lot of trust among each other. So as I talked about before about the heart, so we have to try to have the hearts connect with each other, and that this trust is established, and that our partners think that they get benefit from our side, and that they can rely on us, that we will have their best interest at heart all the time. So it's not that, you know, sometimes you get a call from a person and you say, if I take that call, what does he want from me? So different to when you get a call from somebody else and say, oh, wow, I'm sure there's something interesting in it for me. So I think we would like anybody get a call or contact from Big Grimm to think, there's something which will be interesting for us. Yeah? And so to make the world a better place, let's all cooperate and let's our hearts reach out to each other, cooperate well, and then I think we can achieve all the objectives or targets we were talking about. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Link. Heartful recommendation, heartful collaboration. We don't talk with each other with hates. We need hearts to communicate each other. Kun Nirandorn, how about your heartful final remarks?
Okay, I really like the word companionship and collaboration. I think in terms of collaboration, from my point is from the business sector itself, we have to collaborate more from the upstream all the way to the downstream in order to achieve the GHG reduction, greenhouse gas. And we also have to collaborate more with the government sector as well. You know, if we look at it on the bigger scale size, collaboration between the neighboring country, you know, we don't want to see the CO2 injection that has been imported from our neighboring country or export to our neighboring country as a waste. We want it to be viewed as a cash or something that you can make the money out of it.
As cash.
Yes. And I believe that we have to collaborate to each other, because this is not a single type of business that we can do by ourselves. You know, it's include every sector. It's include the regulator. It's include the leader of the country as well, to see the profit of greenhouse gas reduction. And I believe our Prime Minister already made a commitment that we're going for the net zero in 2050 or 2060. PTTEP as well, we have the inspiration to go for the net zero in the year 2050. And we have a very strong commitment with that. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I like that. You turn the greenhouse effect into cash. What will you think about how to improve collaboration in that massive scale?
Yeah, in the early days where we are today in the decarbonization sort of pathway, I think collaboration is critical. I actually don't think that the industry needs to be in competition with each other. I think in another maybe decade or a decade and a half, yes, you know, the industry can compete with each other, but in the early days, to make this happen, the industry needs to collaborate and work together. Frankly, this is exactly what the industry did in the 60s and 70s, as I was alluding to earlier with the LNG value chain. The partners came together, governments came together, and they unlocked that entire value chain that we see today. Now, in a conversation with one of the very senior Japanese government officials, he actually totally agreed with me, because Japan and Korea played a critical role in actually unlocking the LNG value chain. But his remark was brilliant, and I didn't think of it that way. He said, I hear you, Irtiza-san. However, we cannot wait 50 years for this to work. We need this to happen much, much faster. Right? So today, LNG sector there's a lot of liquidity there, but we need, in the space of decarbonization, we need to collaborate, and we need to achieve that level of liquidity much, much faster. We cannot wait like 5 decades for it to come in place. So, and it's not just the industry collaboration that needs to take place, it is the government level collaboration that also needs to take place. And very direct, I mean, companies like Exxon Mobil, we feel that we can play that critical role. We can be the interlocutor to connect business to business and business to government and government to government, and to help educate policymakers our partners to agree to how we work towards a lower greenhouse gas emissions future. The right policies need to be in place. Bespoke policies need to be in place that support this. And as I mentioned earlier, one size does not fit all, especially in this particular business. Maybe in another 15 or 20 years, maybe, but today in Asia Pacific, we need policies that work here, for our markets here, for our people here, and especially to be able to continue to meet the growing economies' needs, who still need energy, we need to be able to do both. We need to be able to increase the supply of energy reliably, cheaply, at an affordable scale, yet work towards a lower carbon future, which I believe can be done because this area is incredibly entrepreneurial and ingenuitive, and with compassion and collaboration, I think we can actually achieve that objective.
Thank you very much. I mean, I can't summarize anything. This is beyond my imagination. How much we learned today. And more importantly, actions speak louder than words. We underspend the times. That means we burn less energy. We use less electricity by ending it earlier than scheduled, and we send it less greenhouse effect to the ambience. So big round of applause to the three gentlemen upon the stage. Thank you very much.